Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
This week, I am honored to speak with National Master Jerald Times. Jerald is a renowned chess educator here in New York, a former chess champion of Harlem, and was named the 2021 Chess Educator of the Year by the University of Texas at Dallas. He is also the CEO of Chess Across Borders, which looks to bring chess to communities all around the world. I look forward to discussing that and a lot more. So, Jerald, great to see you and welcome to the podcast.
And Neil, thanks for the wonderful introduction.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm honored to speak with you. So I want to break the ice by speaking about our mutual friend, Tyrell Harriott from the Kings of Queens Chess Club. He's the one who kind of referred me to you. So I was just wondering how you knew Tyrell and what your relationship is.
So I would say that I had two relationships with Tyrell, one as a chess player, and when I was the director of Success Academy Charter Schools, I saw him as a professional, as a teacher. So should note that years ago, Chess in the Schools arranged an event where we were playing chess on side of a Navy ship. And all the chess masters in New York got together and we played a lot of the top students. And Tyrell had offered me a draw in a simul position. And I told him, like, no, you're actually winning the game. And he played on. He eventually beat me in the simul. And that was my first introduction as I was giving the simul to Tyrell. And then I got to know Tyrell as a teacher. And he was a phenomenal teacher. Just so many of you may know, the highest rated African-American woman in chess history is a woman by the name of Jessica Hyatt, and Tyrell was her teacher. He was the first one really to show me the value of using Google technologies to advance the learning curve of students. For example, Tyrell would use Google Forms, and through those Google Forms, he would use assessments to test the students. He would comment on their games in real time on Lead Chess, and he would give constant feedback. And one of the beautiful tools that he used, something called Google Classrooms. I'm going to be a little technical here, but it's something we call asynchronous classrooms, meaning that we can address each student's need within that classroom. For example, one student needs help in the opening, another student needs help in the middle game, and yet another student needs help in the end game. So Tyrell will use these Google Classrooms and give various lessons in the same classroom and various assignments in the same classroom. And so that's what I got to see Tyrell as a professional. So I respect him both as a player and as a chess professional.
Okay, very cool. Now, we're going to get into your teaching and your coaching because I know that's kind of what you're known for. But are you doing a lot of playing or any playing yourself? Are you active as a player? Are you doing any tournaments?
Well, I'm going to play in the Senior Open. I'll show my age a little bit, but I'm going to be playing in the Senior Open in Chicago in July. Just so you know, your audience knows my FIDE peak rating was 2,400 back in 2002. Was not able to sustain that rating, mostly due to the fact that I was directing so many programs. And a chess player chess is very difficult, but I also, as I go back to tournaments, I want to change my approach in terms of the openings that I play. I want to play a bit more dynamically. So I was playing Caro-Kann. Sometimes I was playing Londons. This time I'm going to play E4. I'm going to play Dragons and Knight-offs and so forth. So, which I think personally better suits my style. But yeah. I mean, so I'm going to play some games. Summer is one of the few times where I'm not doing as much coaching and training and I get a chance to play chess.
Okay, that's a big change switching to the dynamic side, because I'm just smiling because I'm a D4 person, I'm a London person, I'm a French guy, not so much Caro-Kann, but I'm kind of like safety first, just wait for the other guy to crack, but it doesn't always work out. And playing more dynamically now, is that just, did you study for that specifically, or are you just kind of just jumping in the deep end and you're just going to try these openings? Have you tested them out online?
Definitely test them out online. That's one of the main venues by which we can practice our opening prep. Well, basic truths you learn that when you're playing top players, they tend to grind you down. And the difference between grandmasters, often they know the positional plans. They know where to go in the position more than you do. And I often feel, well, if I'm going to lose to them, am I going to lose to them in a passive position, or am I going to lose to them in the active position? And so I realized that dynamics is a better way to go. There's a very famous book called Chess for Tigers, by the way. Mm-hmm. And in this book, he mentions that, if you're playing a stronger player, you should move towards complications as opposed to moving towards simple positions, because they're actually better than you in both positions, but they're definitely better than you in more simplified positions.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite books. I've spoken about that on the podcast. I always tell everybody, when you're getting into tournaments, get that book, because whether you're a beginner or an advanced beginner, or even if you're 2000 and beyond, that's the first book. That's the primer for chess psychology. But I agree, but that's what he says, because if you go into theory and common lines, those stronger players, they're going to know those positions so well. And you got to take them out of book, because as soon as you can get them to think for themselves, you have a chance of winning.
Right. And Joe Benjamin, in his book, Better Thinking Chess, mentions that sometimes in chess, we should be moving towards complications, right? So, and dynamic play, yes, the modern chess game is a lot more dynamic. The chess we saw in 50, 60, 70, 1950s, 60s, 70s were more based on positional planning. But today we see, because of computers and all the analytics that we have, that the dynamic player tends to be more successful.
Now, Jerald, I know you have some ideas about the evolution of chess as far as the romantic, classical, hypermodern, up to our current tech age, and how we got to where we are. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
All right. So I think it's important from a chess player's viewpoint to see the evolution of the game, because I even believe as players, we go through the same evolution ourselves. So, so the first stage of chess is called the romantic stage of chess. Sometimes we even joke about this stage because we call it the 32-square chessboard, meaning that both sides were pursuing each other's king. If a gambit was given, it was almost considered not noble to take the gambit. And everything that we learn about the attacks, sacrifices, pins, skewers, forks, we learn through the romantics. The pursuit was the king. Then Morphy comes. Morphy is the kind of the go between the classical period and the romantic period. And Morphy shows not just attacking the king, but the global domination of the chessboard. Wilhelm Stein studies Morphy games. He develops this whole conception of classical theory, and he comes up with a very simple point. The game was won not because you were Morphy or because you were Anderson. The game was won because there was a concrete weakness on the chessboard. Sometimes I joke, I call William Steins the Louis Pasteur of chess. Louis Pasteur recognized that there was a germ that broke down the immune system. So everything that we learned about weaknesses, isolated pawns, backward pawns, the quality value of pieces, for example, the two bishops are better than the two knights, the aggressive rook versus the passive rook. All these things in terms of the structural weaknesses we learned through the classical period. And just 30 years after or 40 years after this revelation of the classical period, is that here comes the hypermodern period. And often when we think about the hypermodern period, we think about the fianchetto bishops or asymmetrical openings, Alekhine defense, readies, and so forth. But there's another major contribution of the hypermodern period, which we recognize that certain weaknesses have strengths. Meaning, for example, I can't play a Bengal gambit. I mean, black develops on the queen side before they develop on the king side. I mean, that's breaking classical principles. Or I can't play Benoni. Well, Benoni has a backward pawn. So the recognition that certain weaknesses have strength. In fact, I now make another analogy to Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk solved polio by shooting polio back into the body, meaning the virus became the antivirus. And so likewise, in the Hyde Martin School, one of the biggest contributions is the recognition that weaknesses have strength. Now, there's a period really right between that because the Russian analysis in the game was amazing. And one of the first things that the Russians did was they analyzed the game from the opening to the middle game and to the end game. So it was this type of complete and rigorous approach through the Russian school of chess that chess continued to advance. But now we are in the technological aspect of the game, meaning thousands of games are played each day, millions of games are played each day via the internet. We have analyzing engines, and we have databases. So imagine Bobby Fischer, one of the great minds who ever played the game. He was playing chess, but he was turning page by page. Now we can go over hundreds of games, see the plans of those games through databases. I can play, again, thousands of the games on the database, on the internet. And the real value of this is that it doesn't affect my FIDE rating. It doesn't affect my USCF rating, but I can practice skill sets. I can recognize patterns, right? So the previous players, we did not have, last thing here are the analyzing engines, right? So which means that up until, let's say, the 1980s or 1990s, chess was advanced by human thought. Now, for the first time, chess is advanced by AI/digital thought or digital technologies. And so the tools of the modern player are like no tools we've ever had before. And what is the power of these tools? So when I grew up, there were 200 grandmasters in the world, and now there's 1,700 grandmasters in the world. And so these tools are often the equalizing force in the game of chess.
Fascinating. And then you had mentioned something when we spoke in the past about the learning zone and the performance zone.
Right. So often when we see a brilliant chess game, we often think about, Fischer's game of the century, right? So we look at the performance, right? But what we don't know is how Fischer got there. For example, in the case of Bobby Fischer, we know that he had a radical leap somewhere around 11 and 12 years old, right? So he was just a regular chess master, and all of a sudden he became this extraordinary player. So often what happens with chess, we're studying the outcome, but we don't study the path to that outcome. And our improvement as players will not really increase until we understand the learning zone. Like recently, I'm realizing the power of liquidation in chess, and that chess ultimately is a game of trade-offs, of constant contact between pieces. And it's my personal difficulty with endgames was really I did not know how to trade off the pieces to get to the superior endgame, right? So when you look at Capablanca, we think about how Capablanca executed the endgame, but how did he get there? How did he get the superior piece, the rook versus the bishop, or the two bishops versus the knight, or the queen and knight versus the queen and bishops? These are all considered superior metrics in regards to this. So, so often, again, the chess player, we have to begin to see how did they get there. We have to begin to ask those questions, and I think once we begin to understand the learning zone, we can see for ourselves just the methods of improvement, in other words.
Right. And you've mentioned before, as far as the growth of a chess player, like what happens inside a chess player, is that kind of relates to what you're saying, but can you give me a little bit more about that? Because I know you had expressed this idea, but I find it very interesting.
Right. So, when I was I directed many programs at the Mott Hall School. It's a gifted and talented program in Harlem. There are measurements and there are movements. So measurements is something that we can see, a rating, a placement in the city-state national championship, how many trophies are won at the end of the year, and so forth. So these are measurements, but a movement is the internal transformation inside of a child. So for example, you'll see that young people, they go from reacting to responding. I react to a mosquito bite, but I respond to a letter. For example, a person puts a rook on the 7th rank, and Maybe rooks usually are good on the seventh rank, but maybe I can allow that rook to go to the seventh rank. So I'm no longer reacting to the position. I'm beginning to look at it more holistically, and I'm beginning to respond. I believe it's Sun Tzu. He has this beautiful line. He says the losing army first fights, and then they see the conditions of winning, while the winning army first seeks the conditions of winning, and then they fight. So by metaphor here, by analogy, the losing army is reacting, and the winning army is responding. So the movement from reacting to responding is one. Another one is the difference between facts and truths. A fact is what is, and the truth is understanding what is. For example, the fact is I'm going to lose my queen. The truth is I need to lose my queen to win the chess game. Often we don't make the distinction between facts and truths. And I know I had this problem because I was one of the early editions of DBSK's Endgame course. I wasn't solving some of the problems. I mean, I was getting a bit frustrated. And I realized that the problems that he was giving were often very counterintuitive problems on purpose. This was a purpose. And he was trying to break our very conventional view of the game. And then when I stopped looking just at the facts of things, I began to look at some of the paradoxical ways. So yes, I actually have to put this rook on this square, and maybe it may be captured, but that is the path to victory and so forth. And I would say, there are many movements, and I would say in terms of the inner life of a player, another interesting movement is between desire and will. Desire is to do that which I want to do, and will is to do that which I want to do, even when I don't want to do it. So I had a chance to play Chessboard in a one-on-one game. And I think many people have told you, ever been around Chessboard? Chessboard has energy. And I can feel, he was so energetic at the board, I can feel him imposing his will upon me, in essence. Right? And you hear the same thing about Bobby Fischer. They used to call it Fischer fever. So you find out with strong players that they often reverse bad positions. It's not necessarily because they have superior knowledge. Sometimes they simply have superior will at the chessboard. And I think that this level of grit is often undervalued or devalued in terms of that. So yes, these are some of the movements: reacting to responding, facts, truths, desire to will.
And I think a lot of players, they know the theory, they know the openings, but the mental side of it that you're talking about, they never really mastered, or they never really harnessed it. And so their improvement is limited, even though they have all this quote unquote knowledge, because, their headspace is not where it should be. Their, improvement is limited. Whereas you have other guys who, their opening repertoire is like non-existent. Their end game is but they're pretty good with tactics, but they just have this will to win every game. And they actually have better results than a quote unquote, stronger player, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a sense in, again, the mindsets. I mean, these are mindsets during the battle we call the chess game. And we should be a lot more aware of it. Like even, if I might say, in the last World Championship match, or the last two World Championship match, where we had Ian Nepomniachtchi, really a great, talented, attacking player. And I think a lot of his difficulty, not so much of how he wins, but how he negotiates the loss.
Yeah.
And we see that often when he loses, he doesn't respond the same way. And you can see that 140 move game that he lost to Carlsen was really the game changer in the match. And he was leading the match the whole way with Ding Liren. And again, how does a chess player negotiate a loss? It's significant. So often we have to look at the psychological side of the game, but even more so the mindsets of chess players and the type of changes that they have to make. So we can have the World Championship talent. We also need the World Champion psychology to be world champion, in other words.
What did you think of the Ding Nepo match overall? Because I think I have some thoughts, but I'm curious because it wasn't what everybody expected. I mean, I guess I'll go first. Like, I liked it for the wrong reasons. I liked it because Ding played a French and a London, which are my two openings. So all the guys from the club who ribbed me about my London system, I was like, there you go. It's now validated, and he won in spectacular fashion. But the other thing too is that I'm just laughing. You had games with a result like from the start. Everyone thought it was going to be like a series of draws, and it was like you had these decisive games. It was much more fascinating than I think anyone could have predicted. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I like to echo some of what you said. I mean, it was a bloodbath. Let's be honest. I mean, they were going at each other. I think it was one of the more exciting, maybe not in terms of accuracy of play, but it was one of the more exciting World Championship matches. But I mean, the irony here is that Ding Liren he's behind in the whole match, with the exception of the tie breaks, right, where he now decides the match. So, I had great compassion also for Nepomniachtchi. He has this fight against Carlsen. Now he has this fight against Ding Liren, and the World Championship somehow has been elusive. It has escaped him. For me, this in reference to Nepomniachtchi, I'm hoping that he learns to how really it's not you're not measured from your victories. You're measured by how well you recover from a loss. It's almost like watching the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl, where we see that two different halves. Philadelphia was dominating the first half, but they did not make the adjustments in the second half, whereas the Kansas City made the adjustments in the second half. Right? Some people may say, well, hey, there was a bad call by the ref, and so forth. But you can really see that one team scored in the first half, and the same team did not score in the second half because of adjustments. And so likewise, in match play is different from a general tournament play, because match play is I have to know myself and I have to know you. And so, and I think in the case of Nepomniachtchi, for him, he has to say, how do I deal when I lose a chess game? And we see that he did not really respond well to losses, which hurts his momentum and affects his next game and so forth. So if he evolves as a thinker, or as a not so much. I mean, if he evolves as a competitor, is what I'm really looking for. It'll be interesting to see, because any given time he's still number 2 on the FIDE list. But this is going back into your point. It was an incredibly exciting match. We must give Ding Liren a lot of credit. He showed grit, being behind in the whole match and then overcoming in the tie breaks.
Yeah. Now, the World Championship format generally, do you like the fact that there's tie breaks at the end with speed games? Because that always seemed, this is just my opinion, I'm just an amateur player from Long Island who runs a chess club. So I don't know if I'm the most qualified or deserving to make this opinion, but it just seems that for a world chess championship, to have it go to speed games to decide the winner, it just seems wrong. But on the other hand, I know it can't go on forever. Just wondering if you have an opinion on that either way.
It's a different time, right? I mean, than early on in chess, where we saw these battles. For example, the longest World Championship match up in is something like 48 games. Karpov-Kasparov, 1984. Before that, it was something like 35 games. Aliekin, Capablanca, 1927. And so the question is attention span, and does the audience want to see these long, drawn-out matches? And so I think FIDE has tried to alter the rules to find a way to end the match. So I would say that, I mean, for example, someone like Carlsen, who's good in so many different genres. He's good in the blitz, he's good in the rapid, and he's good in classical chess. So it does favor this format, certain type of players. But I mean, I think your point is well taken. I mean, should the World Championship match be ended on a speed game, or should we find some other tiebreak methods? And I'm willing, like you, I'm willing to look for alternative tiebreak methods, so someone is not penalized for not being a rapid player, and so forth. Yeah, it's a possibility. I can't think of an answer right now, but I do understand why FIDE might want to go to a different method of ending the World Championship.
Yeah, because I'm reminded of, I've mentioned this before, I actually saw Magnus versus Karyakin back in 2016, right? Because I'm in New York. South Street Seaport, right? From where I am on Long Island, it was maybe, I don't know, 40-minute drive. So it was really cool. But I almost felt like Magnus deliberately tried to steer it to the speed round because he knew he would dominate. I mean, I don't know. This is just speculation, but it's almost like he wanted all those draws and then he just kind of, I don't know, because I just think you could sort of, I don't want to use the term game the system, but in a way you could make sure it's an even score. And if you feel you're a better speed player than your opponent, you could just get it to that point. I mean, but then again, you have to make sure he doesn't beat you along the way. I mean, I'm sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth, but you know what I mean? I feel it could almost be used strategically to kind of alter the structure of the event.
Carlsen's one of the few players who could actually do that.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
A lot of players can't say, let me take my opponent to. At the time, the World Championship match was 12 games. It recently switched to 14 games, but not many people can do this. Carlsen is a unique talent that he is so versatile in all these genres.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yes, I'm sure he was aware that, hey, when we get into the tie breaks, I'm highly favored because we have rating systems in all of them. I mean, even in the last match, Ding Liren has a higher rapid rating than Nepinachi. So Ding Liren must have known that if I can just hold on in this match, I can win. I have a good chance of winning in the tie breaks. So yes, it does favor us. So right now we can say that the World Championship match does favor the more versatile player and the player who is not just good in classical chess, but is good in other genres. But again, I think the question is, what is the alternative? What can we do other than ending these matches on rapid time controls? And like I said, I'm amenable to other possibilities. I just don't know what to do at this. I don't have a recommendation.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think it's something we need a conversation about. Jerald, I'd like to switch gears a little bit, talk about your own chess improvement journey. Now, you've achieved a master ranking. You spoke a lot about mindset and things like that. Was there anything specific or a few things, like maybe it was a book, maybe it was a certain type of study plan that you feel helped you the most get to where you are as a player?
I would say that my journey to master, like many people, it was autodidactic. I didn't have any specific training. But once I got to master, I had a chance of being trained by a very good Russian grandmaster and trainer by the name of Miran Shir, who is now passed. And Miran was really one of the first ones to show me that chess was a data game, right? Meaning that without this opening prep, I could not play against these top players. And through the opening prep, the beauty of opening prep is that it gives you the middle game planning, where your pieces should be. When Kasparov speaks of Michael Adams, he says that Adams is one of the few players in the world who knows where all his pieces should be. And this is where this Russian trainer really helped me. And I was able at the time to get a 2400 FIDE rating. So I think the difference between the Romantic period and the modern period, in the Romantic period, we're checkmating the king. In the modern period, we're checkmating data, right? Meaning I have to now counteract the information from the opponent. And even if you're good, like let's say Fischer, for example, in the 11th game of the World Championship match, well, as good as Fischer is in the knight off, as good as he is in the poison pawn variation, he was not prepared for Spassky, and Spassky crushed him in game 11, because it shows you even at, especially at the highest level, that a very strong player, if they're not prepared, they're going to lose. So that was the biggest point. So once we are able to get that information, we can be in the battle. And I think often games are won simply because we do not know the arguments, right? Meaning your talents will not show. Neil, you could be an incredibly talented player, a French player that can play all these beautiful French structures, or a London player that can play both sides of the board. But if you're getting a bad position, right, you're not going to be successful. So checkmating data is the difference between the old game and the modern game.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Now, you also have some experience playing in Washington Square Park, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what that's about, because a lot of times it's portrayed, like you see it, all the guys and the hustlers and the trash talk, you see it portrayed in movies and the media. I don't know how much of that is exaggerated, but I'd love to hear about that experience. Maybe you have a story or two you could share, something like that.
Right. So, okay. So it was a different time, right? There was no internet. So everybody met in the parks, right? That was the social communion. It was the way that people met. We met in clubs. We met in parks. And part of the park culture was gambling, right? I mean, you bet on chess games, and sometimes not only would you bet on your own game, you can bet on someone else's games. For example, I got to see Yasser Seirawan. He would come to Washington Square Park. He would beat some of the hustlers at the time. He was giving them 5-1. Jinji Adishvili. I mean, he was a big park guy. He played in Washington Square Park for many years. There was there was a very talented African American player by the name of Sam. Sometimes Sam would be grandmasters in speed chess and so forth. So it was this kind of meeting ground for everyone. And one of the beautiful things about chess is that it is a passport. It is a way of it brings people together, in other words, right? So from the Russian grandmasters to the park hustlers to the very talented up-and-coming African-American chess players, they all met inside of these parks, and they engaged, and they played each other. And there were some alternative games. There was a game, I think they called it was it the Joker, or it was a chess piece that would move like a queen and a knight at the same time, right? And so these guys would literally bet sometimes hundreds of dollars on the Joker game. And so you playing international master or grandmaster, but you had the Joker and the grandmaster didn't have the Joker, you would have a big advantage. I think actually the name of the piece was called the Jester. It was the Jester chess piece. So they had alternative chess games, which we today would call chess variants, played inside of these parks. I see people play $200 chess games, $300 chess games. One of the interesting things is that how many of the chess people would share other game culture, meaning chess players can be great backgammon players, they can be great poker players, and so we shared all the secrets. I mean, for example, Elon Schwartz was the number 4 chess player, poker player in the world, and I think we had a backgammon world champion. His name escapes me right. I think his name escapes me right now, but we had a backgammon world champion, and we also had a Scrabble world champion who was a chess player. And what is the link? Chess is a link between poker, backgammon, and Scrabble, right? All this is coming through the chess culture. But I've seen phenomenal games. I've seen very talented players. I mean, Nakamura has come to Washington Square Park. I mean, I've seen Nakamura play Yakov Norowitz, right? I mean, who doesn't want to watch that match and so forth?
Yeah, all right. I'm laughing about the piece that you said moves like a queen and a knight, because those two pieces, the queen and knight, is probably the most powerful duo on the chessboard, right? So to have it as one piece.
Oh yeah. I've seen international masters get checkmated by the Jester from experts who were very astute, very sharp in using this Jester piece. But really, like I said, it was a communal type of gathering, and we shared a lot of secrets. I mean, it was Asa Hoffman, who was one of the first ones. I say this many times, who taught me how strong Bobby Fischer really was. I really did not review his games, and so a lot of trade secrets are shared in these parts. Not just about the hustling. It's not just about the fight, the chess fights and everything. It's also about a lot of sharing, which sometimes I think is not mentioned when we speak about the park experience.
I want to get back to some chess improvements, some chess teaching things, right? Because I know you have a strong background as a coach. Now, I know you work with kids. Do you work with adults as well, like adult improvers, things like that, or no? Is it mostly kids you're teaching?
It's mostly students, but I teach adults privately, and also I'll be teaching a senior class for the first time at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. It's like you, Neil, I view myself as an ambassador of the game, and wherever my passion takes me.
Okay, no, that's great. But I have some specific questions about improvement, what would you say is or are the most common erroneous thinking patterns that you notice with your students? I mean, whether you want to talk about children or adults, but what's like the biggest mistake you see as far as thinking patterns?
Often dismissing your opponent, not recognizing, thinking that, hey, this move is not so important, meaning there's a difference between a dialogue and a monologue, which is the whole process that I explain to young people. You hear, I would joke, you hear my fourth graders, and they say, I moved here, Mr. Times, and then I moved here, and then I checkmated. Whereas in let's say a year later, my fifth graders may say, I moved there, and then they moved here, and then I moved here, and then I checkmated. One is a monologue, the other is a dialogue. So that getting them to recognize the other on the chessboard is very important. One of the erroneous mistakes is rating, right? Because the person has a higher rating doesn't mean that you should lose a game. And just making them responsible, like, no, I mean, so how strong really is an 1800, or how strong really is a 1400, right? Not merely confirming, but challenging some of your notions. And just the idea that you have to work hard to be a chess player, right? And your opponent is not going to bow and surrender to you. So making them honest about the type of work that they need to evolve, right? It's not based on natural talent alone. You really have to work to be a strong chess player.
Yeah. Now, what about the whole thing with tactics? Because one of the things that's out there, I'm sure you've heard this, you see it online, I just hear it anecdotally, is, well, until you're 1800, just tactics. The only thing you should study is tactics. Just do tactics. Don't worry about openings and don't worry about anything else. Just do tactics. What's your take on that?
I think there's many paths to becoming a strong player, right? I mean, I think it's really based on style and strength. For example, if you can win chess games with the French defense, you know how that's long-term thinking and understanding structures, willingness to take the bad bishop that the French players often do. So am I going to tell that player to just study tactics, right? That player is a strategic mastermind. So I don't think there is one path to excellence. I think there are varied paths to excellence. But yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, is that somewhere along the way, your development is not just going to be based on opening theory, but understanding tactical thinking. I had a recent revelation about tactics. Because often when we think of tactics, we think of either winning material or perhaps threatening the king and so forth. But we should look at tactics not as a way of complicating the position, sometimes as a way of simplifying the positions. Now, tactics only occur for one reason, because you have a superior position or you have some edge in the position. Meaning, if you do not have that edge, that tactic can be refuted, right? So if you look at Carlsen, for example, he doesn't necessarily use tactics to gain material, which sometimes he does, of course, but he also uses tactics to trade off into a better endgame, right? So tactics are not always moving to complications. They're often moving to simplification to achieve a certain result, right? So yes, pin and skewers, forks. I mean, yes, we need to know the methods of these tactics, but you're going to find that strong players, they use it to enhance their positional play. That's where I'm really trying to get. Tactics is the end result of often a superior position.
Yeah, and a tactical move doesn't always have to be about immediacy. Like, oh, okay, this wins a pawn. It could lead to a superior position where you grind out a win in an end game, something like that.
Correct.
For adult improvers who say have limited time, for whatever reason, they have a full-time job, they have 3 kids under the age of 10, and, Jerald, I only have a half-hour a day to study, something like that. If adults in that situation have limited study time, what would you suggest is the best way for them to handle that?
That's a great question. I mean, again, there's no magic bullet. I don't believe in magic bullets. I don't believe in magic formulas. But I will say that first find your strengths. Like, what do you excel at? Right. By the way, by definition, the strength is a repeatable act that I do well. For example, if I can draw one beautiful painting, that doesn't make me Picasso, right? But if I can draw if I could do many beautiful paintings. It's when it becomes repeatable, it becomes a strength. So if you are an attacking player, right, you should use that limited amount of time to increase your strengths. As they say in the strengths movement, we manage our weaknesses, but we accelerate our strengths. So whatever type of player you are, for example, strategic player, positional player, you favor end games, you're good at opening preps, and you can get a superior position and so forth, right? Whatever your strengths are, first identify that, and then use that limited time to enhance your ability. But also, we cannot ignore the weaknesses, meaning if I'm horrible at opening prep, but good at the end game, spend some time in correcting it. Now, the theory is that if we're going to evolve as players, we can't just correct our weaknesses. For example, Tal can't just wake up one day and show the world, I'm really a great defensive player, because if he tries to show us that he's a great defensive player, he would never be Tal. And likewise, if a Trojan wants to become, overnight this great attacking player, when we know that he's an incredible prophylactic and defensive player, that's where his strengths lie. And so we have to manage our weaknesses, meaning that Trojan has to learn when to take the initiative at a certain point. But that's not what his style, his strengths are really based on. And the inverse can be said about Tal. So limited time, identify your strengths, manage your weaknesses, and I think perhaps that is a path. But okay, try to find a little bit more time to be a better player.
So a lot of it with that limited time, you really have to have a full assessment and understanding of exactly what you need to work on, and not just say, I'm going to study this, this, this. It has to be relevant to your own specific needs, not some generalized sort of cookie cutter study plan.
Agreed.
All right. So I want to change gears a little bit, and I want to talk about something that's very important. Some people listening probably know about this. Some may not. And for those who don't, I think it's something that they should be aware of. It's something I feel it's important for us to talk about. And that's your lawsuit against the Success Academy. For those who may not be aware, I was just hoping you could kind of explain this from the beginning, what happened and where it's at now. Because again, I think it's something important that people should be aware of who may not be.
All right. So in 2020, I was terminated by Success Academy. I filed a complaint with the EEOC / New York State Division of Human Rights on retaliatory / discriminatory practices within the company. After about 18 months, the New York State Division of Human Rights found probable cause of retaliation, and they found probable cause of discrimination. We left the lower court. We left the New York State Division of Human Rights. They actually it is a court. It is a settlement court, and we decided to file federal charges. They were filed on April 18th, 2023. By the way, we see this as a form of impact litigation. When we say impact litigation, meaning litigation for societal change. We will argue via the deposition, and we will argue in federal court that the company was taking state money, but they held no internal competitions in Black and brown communities, meaning they held these chess competitions in white communities. A teacher had complained about racial discrimination, and that teacher was dismissed from his building and eventually maneuvered out of the company. Another one of the charges is that an African American with a PhD in physics, by the way, who's also a chess master, was given an invasive background check that his white counterparts were not given. And we will argue that if you're taking state money, you ought to hold tournaments in Black and brown communities. If a teacher complains about racial discrimination, they ought not be removed from their building and eventually released from the company. And that background checks should be equitable, right? Meaning that not based on race. It's that if I give you a background check, I just want to make sure you are who you are and that you are, safe around young people and so forth. So these are the things that we're going to bring up and we're going to argue in the federal court. So it has been filed. We're going to go through. There are many steps. The first step is kind of a settlement hearing / then we go through what they call discovery process. They ask me for my information. We ask them for their information. After the discovery process, you go through a deposition, meaning that both one side gets to ask me the questions. Can I demonstrate what I said in the complaint to the federal court? After the depositions are done, then the judge decides whether or not it goes to trial. If it goes to trial, it will be decided by 12 jurors and so forth. Well, I will say that not necessarily filing in federal court, but filing in the New York State Division of Human Rights. They are now hosting tournaments in Black and brown communities. So one thing, I think, irrespective of the outcome of the case, that it will have some positive changes in terms of how they treat professionals, Black and brown professionals, and where they host their tournaments. So I do think that it will bring some positive changes to a company that is doing some good in other ways, right? So, but they must be challenged.
Okay. I mean, it's a shame you had to go through that, and I wish you the best with this. You'll keep us posted. Maybe at some point we'll have you back on, and we can talk about it. But
thanks for letting me share, Neil, as well.
Yeah. Of course. Let's kind of change gears. Let's move on to something positive. I want to talk about Chess Across Borders, which is your organization to bring chess to communities across the world. But I was hoping you could be a little more specific. Like, what exactly do you do? What's your mission? Tell us all about Chess Across Borders.
Eventually, I want to create a digital platform for communities of color, meaning that often when we get the content in chess, they're the top 10 players in the world. But there are great narratives of communities of color. For example, Maurice Ashley, not only did he become the first African-American chess master, but he also he was a great commentator for the game, and he was a great coach. There's an up-and-coming Jessica Hyatt. She's trying to become the first African-American woman to achieve the master title. By the way, she's the highest-rated player. Previous to her was Darian Robinson, I believe, at 21-29. Jessica reached 21-30, so she needs about 70 points to get the master's title. There's no African-American born in the United States that achieved the Grandmaster title. Casa Corley possibly could be the first one's National Master Casa Corley, whereas to GM norms. So these narratives, these stories, I want to tell. In various ways, I just became the coach of Howard University's chess team. They played in the collegiate championships. They placed eighth in the collegiate championships. In HBCUs, right? They are now entering into the mainstream of the chess world. So their stories have to be told, and the push to get them to compete in the Pan American Games / intercollegiate tournament is all part of these initiatives. So that's where I'm going. One, to promote, to tell narratives and so forth, and to give this a broader view of what's happening in the game of chess. Chess is international as it's international language in many ways.
Yeah, and this chess boom that we're experiencing now is just tremendous. You had it from the pandemic, and you had it from, the Queen's Gambit, and now from online chess. It's just amazing how it's exploded. Now, as you know, I run a local chess club here, and my biggest fear, I apologize to longtime fans of the podcast because I've given this speech about 5 times, but too bad, so sad. Deal with it. Anyway, I was worried that, the pandemic, online chess, like that's going to be the new thing and no one's going to show up in person. And I was completely wrong. It's almost like a sociological analysis, right? It's almost like a Malcolm Gladwell type of chapter where it actually increased over the board chess because people got into it. They started playing online and they realized, this isn't enough. It's just not the same. And I'll argue that all day, online chess and in-person chess, it's just not the same. And so I had a ton of people come to the club interested in playing just because they wanted more and they weren't getting enough looking at a computer screen. So it's fantastic. And then, of course, the Queen's Gambit is about tournament chess, right? The Queen's Gambit just isn't so much about chess and the story of, what Beth Harmon, that's the character's name or something like that. It's not just it's about playing in tournaments. So people forget that the Queen's Gambit is not so much about chess. It's about tournament chess. So people wanted a part of that. And I just think it's amazing that it actually increased over the board chess.
Yeah, right. I mean, we know that chess.com grew geometrically. I think they tripled their membership from 400,000 to 1.2 million during the pandemic. And this the outpouring of that, people beginning to recognize the beauty of the game, the power of the game. And it is, one of the most underestimated or devalued aspects is the social impact of the game, of how it brings various people together, right? Since it's generational, between young and old, it's cross-gender, between men and women. The Queen's Gambit is about the rise of a woman chess player. It's cross-cultural, meaning various social classes and groups all get together to play the game. And so its potential market growth is huge. I mean, people are beginning to recognize potential market growth. The fact that we have 600 million people playing chess throughout the world. And now they want to sit down at a tournament and play these long chess games. It's absolutely beautiful. But in part, the gift of the pandemic is that people got a chance to slow down and see the beauty of the game.
Yeah. And let me end with this. What I tell people who are getting into tournaments, like they'll email me, I want to play at your club, but I'm kind of a beginner. And I'm just, jump on in. Come on in. The water's fine. Half the club is unrated or newer players. Just do it. Because some people get this mindset. I'm just wondering if you agree where, well, I don't want to play in a tournament until I'm quote unquote ready, until I study first because I want to do really well. And I'm like, it just doesn't work that way. You get better at playing in tournaments by playing in tournaments. You just have to jump in, fall on your face a little bit, lose games. That's the only way. But they think they can hide behind like a study plan and then jump in and they're going to be 2,000. Like, do you agree the best way is just to jump in?
The learning ground is the battleground. The battleground is the learning ground, right? That is the way that you learn. Chess is two things. It's not merely the accumulation of knowledge, but also the amount of warriors that you countenance, right? There is no there's nothing like you can't substitute water or food, nor can you substitute competition for a chess player. You actually have to play stronger opponents to become a better chess player, irrespective of how much books you read.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that. The learning ground, the battleground is the learning ground. I'm going to stick that right here. I like it. So, Jerald Times, thank you so much. Fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Thank you.
And Neil, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back on. And for those of you listening at home, as always, we really appreciate it. And I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everyone.